Hey guys, so I wanted to take a look through the ACT reading section and just give you an idea of how I would approach these notions. So a lot of my videos will have like a savvy slash or smart distinction. So the smart idea is that, okay, you need to know all this different content for the test. The savvy idea is like, okay, here we go. Now that you know this content, here's how you take this test quickly and just look at the questions and try to figure out what's going on really quickly, right? Speed is the name of the game, especially on the ACT. Compared to the SAT, the ACT is a much faster paced test. But today we're mostly talking just strategy because it's the reading section. So on the reading section, there's not really that much you can do to learn about, at least in terms of content stuff, to prepare yourself. The passages, you have no idea what they're going to be on, at least like specifically. You know, broadly, there's going to be a natural science, a social science, a literature, and a humanities, but beyond that, you have no idea what the sources are, so it's not like you can read a bunch of stuff and learn what's going on. You just have to figure out how to effectively read these passages, figure out what the question is asking, and then figure out what the answer is. So one thing I'm going to do here is actually talk a lot about how to do this sort of reading without reading. So what I mean by that is sort of unclear, but when we take a look at this question, right, the natural idea is that you want to go ahead and just read through this whole passage and be like, blah, 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 okay, try to figure out what's going on. But this is actually not the way that I recommend doing the test. So there are two good ways to do this. One way is a really fast skim, just to get an idea of what's happening. So, you know, here it's like, okay, the guy's growing up, so talking about architecture, Bombay is new, talking about his childhood. Part of this is just reading the first sentences and trying to look for some keywords, right? Just talking about what his parents are doing. Objects, something, this is long, I don't know. And then talked to his father and had some conversation. That's the level of skimming that I would recommend doing if you're going to skim. For our purposes, I'm actually just going to go directly to the questions without reading the passage. I'm going to show you how we can make that work by using line citations and clever multiple choice reasoning in order to figure out the correct answers here. So when I'm looking at one, the passage as a whole can primarily be characterized. This is one, if I haven't read the passage, I'm just going to have to skip. So I'm going to circle this and come back to it. Same thing with two. You know, I'm not exactly sure where this is going to show up, but I do have this great photographers. First great photographers is a strong keyword. So I'm going to mark this once I have a better idea of where I might find this in the text, and then go back to it. Three is where we want to start. So in the lines 25 through 31, the narrator muses over, then rejects the notion that. Okay, so when I'm reading a question like this gives me some really important information. This tells me that my answer is in lines 25 through 31 and nowhere else, very importantly. And that it has to be some idea that the narrator thinks about, and then he says, no, I don't really think that's the case. So let's take a look at 25 through 31, right? So in the 10 years before my own coming into the world, the city has been a gigantic building site, as if it were never here to become, as if it knew it had to provide itself in finished condition by the time I was able to start paying attention to it. No, I don't really think along such solipsistic lines. I'm not over-attached to history or Bombay. Me, I'm the under-attached type. Okay, so even there, I think I might have, okay, yeah, it was just through 31. So even then, like, I could have stopped here and not kept on reading. I know that for sure it has to be in this little area. So we're looking for something that he muses over and then rejects. So no, I don't really think along such solipsistic lines sounds a lot like a rejection, right? This no. The idea is like, okay, he's considering something, now he's going back on it. So I want to see the thing he was thinking about just before he comes to this rejection thought. And it's as if it knew it had to provide itself in finished condition by the time I was able to start paying attention to it. What is it referring to? It's referring to the city being Bombay, right? So there's this idea that the city has to finish itself for him in some important way, right? So let's see which best matches that. Merchant played an important role. No, that's vague. He started paying attention to Bombay at a young age. So this is something that he muses over, but does not reject. This is something that he accepts as true. His anticipated birth was one of the causes of the rush to finish the building Bombay. So that sounds exactly like what we were reading about. And then Bombay had been a gigantic building site in the years before he was born. This is, again, something he does muse over but does not reject, right? So one of my students actually came up with this idea of multiple checks, right? So in order for a question to be correct here, I need to get a check for musing over and a check for rejecting. Here I get a check no, Here I got a check, check. Here I got a check, no. And here I get a no, no. Now probably this merchant thing is true, but it's not in lines 25 through 31. So really zoom in on that and restrict your attention to that space. So we're going to do the same thing with this other citation, 32 through 43. We're looking about literary devices. We know these are all literary devices, so I'm not going to use that as a distinguisher. But what is used to describe Bombay? So I'm looking at alliteration, allusion, personification, simile. So 32 to 43. Let me confess that even as a child, I was insanely jealous of the city in which I was raised, because my parents had love. They loved each other, they loved me, and they loved her. Her, not so good. Bombay was my rival. So on account of the romance with the city, when my mother wasn't with me, with him, she was out there with her, with Bombay. So again, he's calling the city a woman, basically, giving her a feminine pronoun. So this is an example of personification here. Here I'm not even going to consider the other ones, because that's knockout, drag out, right? Which of the following statements best captures how the narrator's parents balance their parental duties with their work at the construction company? So luckily we were just reading this last passage where he talks a little bit about how his parents do their parenting. So I'm pretty sure we're going to find it right in there. And we're specifically looking for parental duties. So the ACT is really, really good about giving extremely clear, extremely decisive keywords here. So parental duties, let's see if we can find that somewhere in this passage. So I'm going to start here, right, and go up, parents of the love. Okay, shared parental responsibilities. So responsibilities, that's close enough to duties for me. But this says that they are sharing their responsibilities, and, you know, they seem to be handing the child off. We're talking about the mother's either with the daughter, the mother's either with the narrator or with the city. Father's either with the narrator or the city, and then, you know, swapping off. This whole idea. So I'm looking for something that suggests that there's a shared responsibility for parenting. So the narrator's mother did the majority of the work, while the narrator's father took care of the narrator. Not really, you know, there's balance. Traded off responsibility for taking care of the narrator, working at the construction company. This is good, but let's just see the other ones, right? Narrator's father worked at his designing board, while the narrator's mother took the narrator along to building sites. So actually, no, she hands him off before we go to building sites. And the designing board is something that happens, I'm not even sure if it's actually in that part, but it's definitely not something where the father's at the designing board and not paying attention to the kid. Narrator's parents both worked at the construction company, so this part is true, although they didn't work there at the same time, they both worked for the same construction company. What about while the narrator stayed home with a babysitter? No mention of babysitter. Gotta be B. So number 6, as it's used in line 9, the word sweep most nearly means. Okay, so for this vocabulary and context thing, generally what they're going to do is give you a word that is a familiar word, you know, something that you've probably heard of before, but they might use it in a sort of strange situation. So looking at 9, looking for the word sweep, right? So sweep, there it is. We're going to try to get an idea of how this is meant, right? The Malabar and Kumbala Hills were our capital and Palatine, the Braeburn Stadium was our Coliseum, and as for the glittering Art Deco sweep of Marine Drive, well, that was something not even Rome could boast. So maybe you're not exactly sure what he's using the word sweep to mean here. But notice that they're talking about all these nice little architectural things, right? The grandeur of the metropolis, all these places where capital and Palatine. So they're drawing these allusions to Rome, right? He's like, okay, these are places that are just as impressive as the architectural structures of Rome. So I think this has to be representing some sort of a physical feature, right? So that kind of throws out victory, search, and removal and leaves only area. That's the only thing that can be like a physical feature, like an architectural feature would be. In the context of the passage, the primary function of lines 6 through 10. So in narrative passages, sometimes they'll ask something about what's being said explicitly by characters, for example. This is one where it's a little bit more of like a meta question, like what is the author trying to do? So 6 through 10 is just where we were looking, right? Yeah, so this is the whole part where he's comparing Bombay architecture to Roman architecture. So, I mean, that's like literally what's happening in A, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be A. Okay, help illustrate how the term Art Deco was derived. So notice that they talk about a local invention's name derived in all probability from the imperative of to Z, Art Deco. But that's something that's not in 6 through 10. Contradicts the idea that Bombay was in Golden Age, doesn't do that, right? They talk about how fancy this place is. Provide examples of Bombay-style architecture in Rome. This is a close one, right? So he's talking about great architectural features in Bombay and in Rome, But actually the style of the architecture is not going to be the same. This is a little bit tough to figure out if you don't know it, but they actually do give it up here. So it is worth reading this little stuff before you start. Art Deco is an architectural and decorative style that was popular in the first half of the 20th century. Obviously not something that was big in ancient Rome. The narrator as a child viewed the work his parents did for merchant and merchant with a strong sense of, okay. So we already know that he talks about, his parents having to run off to Bombay and take care of her. That's basically how they do their work, right? They're talking about how he's at merchant and merchant. And, so he's going out to work. His mom's going out to work. And we already had this whole idea of Bombay being his rival. So I'm already leaning towards jealousy here. But one of the best ways to answer these sorts of questions is to look at the justifications they give for these answers. So the work provided the family with enough money to live extravagant lives. I didn't get a sense of extravagance from the passage. Fear, the narrator knew his parents were often so exhausted that they were careless about safety. Again, nothing about carelessness or worry about his parents. Respect, his parents were known for the quality of workmanship. This is an interesting one. So definitely his parents were probably well respected because, they kept building this stuff. But there's actually not an explicit declaration of them being respected. Furthermore, it's not in the right context because the narrator is supposed to be a child. The narrator as a child. So this is him describing himself as a child. Other stuff can be, him looking back on what it might have been in the past, right? So it's going to be H here. As it's used in line 38, the phrase drew up most nearly means, okay, so drew up. There's going to be another vocab in context. Let's see 38. So they drew up that weekly rota, or list, of shared parental responsibilities. So here, this notion of drawing up means that they're basically writing it out, right? So not extended, prepared seems right, approach not straightened. I switched to pink just because it shows up a little bit better. In the last paragraph, the narrator's father shows the narrator the photos of storefronts and piers. Okay, here's another really strong keyword bit, right? So I know it's in the last paragraph. That's first off, we can really easily look there. Now I want to see this photos of storefronts and piers, or at least storefronts and piers, right? Storefronts and piers, here it is. So when his father's showing him storefronts and piers, they're asking about his intention, right? So let's see what this says. When I said this to my father, he showed me photos, still has the storefronts and piers, told me I was still young to understand. See where people lived and worked and shopped, he clarified with a rare flash of irritation, and it becomes plain what they were like. For all his digging, Vivi Merchant was content with the surfaces of his world. I, as photographer, son, yada, yada, yada. We almost don't care at this point, because now this is going to the son's thoughts, not about what his dad was doing. So the dad here seems to be thinking that, okay, if I can see the outside world, then you can describe the people. Teaching her about commercial progress, we don't get that. That's not what the dad said. Convinced the editor Dial and Hassler, okay, I don't know what that is. But that's probably in the paragraph that we didn't read because we didn't have to. Clarify his claim that the photo collection was not about modern-day Bombay, but rather about the early 20th century. Again, nothing like that. Illustrate that photos of places can reveal as much about the people who spent there as photos of the people themselves. It's got to be this J. Okay, so you might be, yeah, we're done, but remember, we actually skipped these first two. So the narrator as a whole can primarily be characterized as the narrators. So when I think about what's in here, there's some architecture stuff. There's some thinking about him as before he was born, thinking about his childhood and his parents. This we haven't looked at, but let's just ignore it for now and hope for the best. And then this is like he has this relationship with his father that makes him want to take pictures, right? So exploration of the relationship his narrator and his parents had with the city of Bombay. This is pretty tempting so far. Description of important buildings and locations in Bombay. So there's a lot of this in the first paragraph, but when they talk about the passage as a whole, you need to kind of think about it in terms of real estate. How much of the passage is this taking up? Not so much. Just really in the first little paragraph, and then they kind of leave it. Argument for Bombay's prominence in the world of architecture, and kind of make the same argument for C as I did for B. And then D, concerns about the emotional environment in which the narrators raise. I don't know. The narrator seems to be mostly okay, and really he talks more about Bombay than just that. So I really like A here is going to be the best answer. So then the narrator describes the photos by Bombay's first great photographers as primarily inspiring the narrator too. Okay, So this is one where we have to do a little bit of consideration. So we didn't see this anywhere, so it's probably going to be in the paragraph that we ended up skipping, that big chunky paragraph in the middle of the second column. And this first grade photographers, I mentioned this is going to be a strong keyword, so let's go ahead and look to see if we can find that strong keyword. First grade photographers. Okay, great. I already forgot the question. Describes the photos from the first grade photographers in order to do what? So his portraits of the city became his first artistic influences, if only by showing him not to, or exactly what he did not want to do. Okay, so this describes how beautiful this stuff was, you know. He yearned for the city streets, blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, you can read all this out, but basically the idea is that Dial and Hassler kind of took some pictures of some nice pictures of the city. This guy wants to take pictures of people. So, importantly, he still wants to take pictures, right? So, it's not that the narrator wants to turn away from a great career in photography. He just wants to do something that Hassler and Dial, right, have not done. Create great panoramas. This describes what those great photographers did, which is exactly what he does not want to do, he says. Produce images as father would add to his collection. We actually already know this isn't the case from question 10 that we answered. So it's got to be everyday life in Bombay streets. So there we go. Hopefully that wasn't too tough to follow. And again, you know, the great thing about this is that we didn't end up having to read this whole thing. You know, there's whole big sections of this paragraph that we really didn't have to read too much of. You know, we ended up only reading about half of it, and that can really save you a lot of time, again, especially on this really fast, like really crazily happening ACT test. So I know that we're going to be a little bit below pace, mostly because I was explaining everything, but you know, you have 35 minutes, 40 questions. If you can spend less than a minute per question, say like 30 or 40 seconds, really if you're doing this mentally and going and reading and not having to read it out loud, you can definitely do that sort of thing. And at the very least, you can knock out these line citation things really, really fast. You should always be able to answer those quickly without any problem. Some people would be so extreme as to say, all right, just don't even like read any of the passages on the test. Do those easy ones and then go back and find the hard ones. I'm not that extreme unless you really, really have trouble with pacing yourself on the test. If you're like not even seeing the last passage because you're running out of time, that might be a good strategy for you to start with. But ideally, you adopt the same sort of loop. You're like, okay, I understand what the question is. I know where to find it in the passage, either through a line citation or because it's something that you've read. You know, you have an idea of where it is because you've read something like that. You find the answer in the text. You always have to find it in the text that matches the best answer of the four that they're given. And then you're just like boom, 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 you know. So that's the whole notion between this loop. We're going to keep doing this with the other passages. This one was the prose fiction. And next time we are going to do social science. So hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, as always, take it easy. Till next time.